Okay, this is called a workshop, and to signify a shift in the tone, I'm gonna get rid of this. I detest screens, they're competing with my face, right? You go in this zombie mode. I see my students when they're looking at the screen and they're going like this. So it's like attention on me, right? So the idea is a little bit to discuss blockchain. And there's two concepts that I want to use, and they're very popular. One is innovation, the other one is future. Now, what is interesting about innovation and future, they're actually really old. There's always been an innovation, there's always been a future, relative in time and relatively at a kind of any stage of human evolution. But for some reason, we think we are reinventing innovation and we are reinventing the future. And I'm one of the ones that thinks that is actually doing that. I mean, there's a book of mine that is coming out in a few months, and it's called Methods in Service Innovation. And my interest, I'm a sociologist that has an interest in technology and innovation. And I have a very specific interest in the ways in which technology influences social behavior. So my real interest is social, cultural, economic, even cognitive effects of technology. How do we change the way we perceive the world depending on technology? We know that they do affect the way we perceive the world. But another aspect that I'm really interested in when I talk about technology and innovation is actually the process of innovation. Now, I think part of the discussion today is not so much about the innovation itself, but the processes that can lead to innovation. And normally starts in different ways. It's either a serendipitous act of creativity, someone invents something that then it's used for other purposes, and this is very many times the case with technologies. But other times it's a more consistent effort, and this consistent effort, it's interesting because it gives us the opportunity to look at the evolution of every technology in context, and this context is both historical in terms of the evolution of the technology, but also there's the interesting part of the different forces that have contributed to this evolution, because all evolution are contrasted somewhere, somehow, by someone. And I think that blockchains are really interesting, because I remember in 2009 when I started to talk about Bitcoins, in the tech world it was a bit of a kind of a case, and everybody was interested about it. Very few people knew about it, and very few people understood what blockchains really are. What made blockchains popular was, of course, Bitcoin, that created the very architecture that now is embedded in blockchains. Now, what is interesting about this thing about Bitcoin and blockchains is that I've repeated countless times what they are, because most people are very confused about it. So I came up with a 60 seconds presentation that makes actually sense of what blockchains are. And what really puzzles me, it's really simple, but I don't know why people get so kind of fussy about it. But so I know that there's a lot of people that know way better, that there's all the kind of complexity to it. But the beauty of complex things, or very beautiful, simple ideas, is that you need to be able, somebody to convey kind of the core of it. So I'm going to simplify, so the ones of you that know really the real deal will excuse this. But basically, how does it work? Let's say that we are the world population, and we decide to use 1,000 coins to conduct all our exchanges. Now, this is pretty simple. There's 1,000 coins. If I want something from you, I'll give you 1 coin. Now, I don't have to track that coin because there's only 1,000 of them. They're physical, right? It's very easy. I give it to you. You either have it or you don't have it. So what happens if that coin, instead of being a physical coin, becomes a bit of information, a virtual coin? Well, things get a little bit more complicated. How do I trace the exchange of that information? How do I make sure that I'm not creating a fake copy of that information? So basically what they came up with is something pretty basic. If someone knows the history of banking, you will know that in 1500 in Florence, on the bridge, I don't know if you know the famous bridge in Florence, I actually don't know if you know that the banking system as you know it was developed in Italy, of all places. And actually, it was on that famous bridge that the real kind of evolution of the banking system kind of took place. And it happened on a small kind of desk at a purple cover, and the banker was just a person that was coming with a ledger. Now, would come with a ledger, and you would go to that banker. The banker would put your name and would literally take down notes about the transaction, right? Normally it was a loan or whatever. So the key was that ledger. There was a name and there was an information that said, I gave you a certain amount of money, I expect that money to be back. So the principle of the blockchain is quite simple. They say, okay, let's say that we have 1,000 virtual coins. Let's call them Bitcoin just for familiarity. Let's say that we want to exchange these coins. What we're going to do, we're going to sign on this ledger that transaction. The transaction says something really simple. Person A gives to person B a certain amount at a certain time, right? On a ledger. It's simply writing it down. Now, there's two interesting principles that makes it unique and kind of is very upsetting to existing powers, and we're going to look why it's interesting. Well, first of all, what is the principle? How can we guarantee that that information is not changed? Well, there's a simple way of doing it. Let's say that we make as many ledgers as coins. So everybody that owns a coin owns a ledger. And let's make sure that all the ledgers are synchronized. So every time there is a transaction, everybody changes that information on their ledger, right? It's a pretty simple system. Now, this is Bitcoin. I mean, it's not that complicated. Basically, it's a ledger in your hand that has all the transactions written in it. Now, the difference between this system and the actual Bitcoin is that it's a crypto ledger, right? This information is encrypted. Now, the level of encryption is said to be so high that it cannot be broken. It's a theoretical idea, right? I mean, we know that all codes theoretically can be broken, but what is interesting is that they wanted to make that information private. Now, why is it so interesting? Everybody can say, well, what makes it so unique? Well, first of all, is this idea of the third man being cut out. If I were the banker on the bridge in Florence, I wouldn't have a job because suddenly all the people that were transitioning certain amounts of money would be conducting their information among themselves. They would have their own ledger. I cannot ask for money for the job of signing down that information. I'm taking a certain money from you and giving it to someone else. And for that transaction, I'm taking a certain amount of money. That system, Bitcoin, is cutting off the third man, right? It's an interaction where there's no third man. So here there are the two really aspects that have created this shockwave in the financial system is the cut out of the third man and the encryption. Now, the encryption is kind of interesting because what happens is that actually, if you think about currency and money, it's a privacy by design architecture, right? Cash, it's private, right? So in the very conception, in the very beginning, these transactions were always private. There was no real kind of signing down of who made the exchange, right? In that sense, it was privacy by design because money was designed somehow. And then the other difference is that what does it mean when you actually create a system, and how does it really survive? So there's a rule to this Bitcoin or to any other cryptocurrency is that basically you need a system to create more coins. We said that we have 1,000, right? Let's say that the system says that there's a maximum amount of coins that can be casted or minted, right? So let's say it's 2,000. And there's a system which is a specific task that needs to be accomplished so that you can create an extra coin. It can be either to solve a mathematical formula or it can be a task. It doesn't really matter. What it matters is that there's a specific task that you need to kind of fulfill to create a new coin. What happens is that once you've created this maximum of 2,000 coins, there's going to be no more coins, but you can only sell fractions of the coins. Now, as you can expect, once all the coins are going to be created, the value is going to increase, right? It was a little bit more than a minute, but I think it's pretty simple. Do you agree? I mean, so welcome to this complexity. Now, the complexity comes a little bit later, right? The complexity is why is the financial system so threatened by this? I mean, what is it really going on? well, this is a little bit more complex, right? To explain it, I'm going to use two examples, right? As I said before, I'm interested in technology, but I'm particularly interested in the impact of specific system. And I'm specifically interested in hegemonic systems. How do hegemonic systems come to life? How do they impose themselves? What are the consequences? And what is the cognitive, socio-economic impact of this hegemonic system? And now you're lost, right? It's like, Francesco, what are you talking about? I'll explain it in a very simple terms. I always own my crowd when I ask this question, because a number of smart people, I ask this same question many years, and the question is theoretically so simple, and yet I'm 100% sure that statistically you're not going to be able to answer. That's a challenge. You want to bet? Can anyone in this room tell me why we have 24 hours in a day? You live by it, right? It's a fundamental system. It's articulating our lives. I mean, I don't need to tell you how important it is, right? But yet, anybody knows why it's 24 and not 10?
We have a numeric system with 12 digits.
You have a numeric system with 12 digits?
12 entities.
Well, I mean, that is a possible answer. It's based on that. But why is it 12? Why didn't it choose 20 hours, 10 hours of day, 10 hours of night? Why didn't it choose 100?
Because 24 is divisible by more numbers.
Sorry, 24?
It's divisible by more numbers.
Yeah. Now, what happens is that, so first of all, you don't know the actual answer, right? You are trying to elaborate on this. That's the real fact here, right? And the other one is that you're trying to apply some logic, right? And that's the second fact here. Actually, it's pretty impressive. First of all, that you have a system that is so pervasive, and yet you don't know how that system was created. So this is my first point. These are hegemonic systems. Now, these hegemonic systems have direct impact on the way in which you perceive the world. Think about weight and scale. 1 kilo, 1 meter, 1 pound, 1 stone. If I say these measures to you, one or the other is going to confuse you, right? I mean, if you're born into one, you're used to scale the world based on these systems, yet you don't know how they were created, but you adopt them unquestioned. They go into your system, in your lives, they govern your life. They govern your social life in incredible ways. You know where I'm going with this, right? So, but what happened is that at a certain point, someone has to invent that system, and then that system has to become hegemonic, right? Example number one. We'll leave this kind of on the side. Normally, I don't tell people why they are 12, because that proves my second point. Because in your great act of independence, you're all gonna Google it, right? Right? And the beauty of this example is that you're not going to find the actual answer to my question if you Google it. Trust me. You're going to find some information about the universal standard time, but you're not going to find the question to why there were 12. I'm going to tell you why there were 12 and not what led to be 12 and not why it was chosen 12. Now, the second example, it's finally landing a little bit closer to Bitcoin, right? It's a little bit about the financial system. Let's call it ruled by numbers, right? I mean, I gave you one example of how we are ruled by numbers, the numbers of time, 24 hours, and the system and modernity and all it means for society. Now, another important one is in the financial system. This banking system has evolved in a way and scale that, you know, we live lives connected to this financial system in one way or another. But probably not all of you in this room exactly know the weight and scale that the scoring system in the States, the credit scoring system in the States, has on personal lives. I mean, any American here right now? So the number 300 to 850 to you mean nothing. Or some of you might know what 300, 850. Do you know? Okay, it's a credit score, right? It can go from 300 to 850. The higher, the better. It's an index that gives a dimension or quality to your fiscal health, right? How good you are of a fiscal citizen, how good you are at dealing with your finances. The higher the score, the better your handling of money, basically. Now, what is interesting about this kind of scoring system? Now, if you go back in time, until the 70s in the States, it was illegal for a bank to share information about their customers. So every bank was in a position of holding information about a specific customer, but they could not share that information. Now, the banks, for a long time, they tried to kind of share that information. Say, it's in our interest to be able to know what Francesco is doing with the other banks so that we can establish his credit score. I mean, how he deals with money. Does he owe money to someone? Is he double paying, double buying, or whatnot? For a long time, there was a strong resistance to sharing that information, right? But of course, what happened over time, the lobbies won. The initial idea and the reason why they were asking for that breach of information was simply already. I said, wave me when it's 20 minutes. I tend to be very verbal, so I have to cut it down. So what happened is that system was designed for a very specific purpose, right? The very specific purpose was that of credit. The bank wanted to know if you owned or if you had to give money to someone. What happened is that in 1989, the credit score was created. The most famous one is called FICO, which stands for Fair Isaac Corporation Score. And basically that number, in fundamental ways, rules your life in the States. If your credit score is poor, you cannot have specific jobs. Now, there's been evidence, and there's been kind of studies that have proved that 1 in 5 jobs are often not given because of poor credit score. There's specific jobs where you can actually not have a job if you have a poor credit score. Of course, if you want to go to work in a banking system, but for example, if you want to go to work for the police, right? And still, that makes kind of sense. What is really common now is that partners are now chosen based on the credit score. After the financial crisis, there's been a boom of using the credit score to select your partner, right? Now, these two examples I used to call what I call leaking containers. It's an innovation that is designed for a specific system. There's a specific technological component to them, or there's an architecture to them that is designed to function in one specific environment. But what happens is that once you've created, you cannot control the outcome or the other uses that are done from that information. Now, there should be a lesson there, right? There should be a lesson. One of the fundamental reasons to advocate for this data privacy is because this is often said, we are not able to control the outcome and potential uses of information in a certain period of time. It might be designed for a specific purpose today, but this was designed for me and getting a new car, and now it's fundamental for me to get a job and get a partner. I mean, this went out of hand. The same is true for the Universal Standard Time. The Universal Standard Time was created to articulate the movement of trains. Then someone said, well, we have to do the same for the banking system, right? Because exchanges between different groups needed a specific time. When does an insurance end in one country or another? There was a purely economic reason. Now, we know that the time is fundamentally articulated in our lives. I call this social navigation systems that are normally used to navigate specific aspects of life, but what happens is that they kind of leak into other aspects. Now, I'm going to spend 5 more minutes to link all of this to blockchain again and what is really happening, right? Yeah. 3? Holy moly. All right, I'm the last one. I'm going to steal 2 minutes. So, basically, the reason why the financial system is fundamentally upset about this is because fundamentally what has happened after the Second World War. I don't know if you know the details, but let me simplify really in 2 minutes. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency. What it meant is that all transactions among states had to go through the dollar. So let's say that I want to buy whatever product before, and I want to pay it in whatever currency. that currency has to first be translated into dollars, transformed into dollars, and then in the other currency, right? This was an agreement that was signed in 1944. In 1944, at the same Bretton Woods symposium, the IMF was created, the International Monetary Fund, right? Started with 26 countries, now it's how many? 200 or whatever. It's a fundamental institution that regulates all transactions among states. And they do it in a very bossy way. Basically, the way they do it is they say every state that wants to participate has to give a certain amount of their income, of their actual money. That money is governed by this institution, and so are all the transactions that this state do, right? It's a monopoly, basically, right? They are controlling the entire financial system. This system that is linked to the dollar was further solidified when in 1970, they created the petrodollar. You know what the petrodollar is? What is the petrodollar? It was an agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia and the OPEC countries that stated that all transactions about oil and petroleum had to happen in dollars. So if you wanted to buy a barrel of oil, you have to pay it in dollars. Doesn't matter where you are, you have to pay it in dollars. Now, that created a very specific system in which one currency has an hegemonic function. And there's one body, the IMF and other institutions, that are controlling the transactions. They're controlling this exchange. This creates a power gap between the different players, right? If you're a small country, if you're Russia, China, emerging markets, the BRICS are so-called, you have less power because you cannot generate as much capital as the states can. Now, the real reason why the financial system are threatened by Bitcoin is because they're cutting the third man. So countries have theoretically the option of bypassing the system that was created on which the entire modern finance is constructed. Too long, huh? Well, you see where I'm going with this, right?
But thank you very much. I think it was good that we had you here enlightening us on blockchains and especially illustrating it with bitcoins and also getting, and I think I like that perspective, the historical foundation and the purpose of it. And I think that actually, I'm sorry about that, we don't have time for questions on this question, but we can take it up, for instance, in the bar afterwards.
Seriously, you want me to work in the bar?
No, at the bar. Because I think we should have...
But I need one closing remark. Okay, it's important. This goes back to the future and innovation. Now, there's a fundamental aspect. If you look at the history of this kind of time and money, what happened is that there's a moment in which these systems are created. Now, the reason, it goes back to the 12 hours. The reason why the 12 hours were chosen wasn't because of any, the Germans wanted 100 hours, other nations wanted different numbers. It was really down to politics. It was at that convention, the political clout of specific groups prevailed so that the standard was created. That had an enormous impact on the way in which we conduct our lives. Now, what is important is to understand that we are at the verge of creating new systems. Now, this is the Wild West. We are creating new time scales, new economic scales and whatnot. There's no prevailing system yet. There's no hegemonic systems yet. So we need a negotiation. We need more people sitting at the table in control of these transactions. So that's why what is happening is the financial systems are trying to take over Bitcoin, right? Because it's in their interest to cut the third man because they want to save money. That's not why it was created. That's not the function. They're not talking about privacy. They're talking about cutting off the third man, being the US in this specific case. But the original input, the original reason why it was created was because of this idea of bringing back privacy by design. Going back to this idea of two people transacting without you having to necessarily know who made the transaction. So we need to intervene in the moment in which these systems are in the process of being created. And that's where we are now, right? So everything needs still to be done. So we are in the active position of being able to have an influence on what are the future standards that are going to regulate the way in which we mate and create kids.